I'm Makini Smith. After going through a divorce, my sister passing away, experiencing narcissistic abuse, and some significant health scares, I realized through sharing my story that I wasn't alone in my suffering. Suffering, subjective distress generated by the experience of being out of balance. In a deep dive to holistically heal mind, body, and soul is where I discovered peace, clarity, and connection. It is impossible to be truly wise without some real life hardship, and we cannot develop post-traumatic wisdom without making it through, and most importantly, through it together. Social connection builds resilience, and resilience helps create post-traumatic wisdom, and that wisdom leads to hope. Hope for you and others witnessing and participating in your healing, and hope for your community. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. Chanelle Phillip is a dedicated and passionate registered social worker and psychotherapist of Grenadian descent with almost a decade of experience working with youth and their families in various capacities. Breanna is experienced in advocating for and with Black youth and families as they navigate systems with histories deeply rooted in anti-Black racism and oppression. As the owner of Breanna Chanelle Therapeutic Services, Breanna prioritizes the mental and emotional wellness of Black individuals, families, and communities by offering culturally relevant therapeutic services and programs that address the unique mental wellness challenges within Black communities. She's been seen on TVO, City News, Toronto Star, and much more. So please welcome to the show, Breanna Chanelle.
Hey.
Hey. Thank you for agreeing to come on and share your story and your expertise with us. I never take it lightly, especially when a therapist comes on here to share their gems and their journey. So thank you in advance before we even have this conversation, because I know it's going to be fruitful. I know it's going to be helpful for me, for the listeners. So I just want to show my appreciation up front.
Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So I started following you, I want to say not too long ago on Instagram. And I love to follow people that inspire me. I unfollow people very quickly. Like I just half my family I don't even follow on social. Let's keep it real. But I definitely inspired, and I love when I see Black therapists sharing their journey. And I know, like, I follow probably most of the people I follow are probably therapists or thought leaders, or coaches or something of that sort, because I'm obsessed with personal development. But I love to see Black women that are therapists. I love to see Black people speaking about healing. I appreciate when you share, parts of your journey, how it began, where you are presently. I love the realness, because I feel like some people feel like, oh, because someone is a coach or a leader or a therapist, that they don't have any problems. But therapists are people too.
I am a therapist who has a therapist. That's what I always say.
Yes.
So if you think that I'm going to listen to all your problems and have no problems,
that part. Let's speak to that part, because I have been saying for years, like, every good coach has a coach. Every, thought leader is inspired by somebody. Every therapist has a therapist. It's important. And I have been very transparent on my platforms about my struggles, my journey. And there was a post, I'm going to say last year, I was sharing about my social anxiety and how I helped my daughter work through her anxiety. And that post went viral, and a generation of people that have no idea who I am,
Mm.
or anything about me, obviously came with their judgments, like, how are you a coach? And, you need to get it together. Like, I was like,
Really? Wow.
okay.
Wow. Wow.
So, which is why I appreciate you
Mm.
sharing your journey on social. And I know that, you address a lot of the mental health challenges and stuff within the Black community. So I have a lot of questions
Yeah.
about that.
Mm.
But let's start with the very beginning before we get to where you are presently, because I'm always curious to know, what people wanted to be or who they wanted to be when they
Mm.
were younger, because I feel like society has a way of um, shaping or reprogramming
Mhm.
our desires, our visions, our imagination, and our fantasies,
Yeah.
trying to tell us to be real or be realistic. So I
Mhm.
would love to know, what little Brianna wanted to be.
Not me already getting curious. When you said little Brianna, I felt wetness. I said, what? I, no, but yeah, so little Brianna wanted to be free. That's all she wanted. She
Mm,
free.
mm,
I am the child of two Grenadian individuals. Both my mom and my dad are Grenadian. So I wanted to be free. I wanted to be an island girl. My dad would, especially my dad, because he has, I feel like he now has more like still in Grenada. So he told a lot of stories, and so I was just a girl. I was just
mm.
but in regards to like dreams, I think at one point I wanted to be a teacher because I really loved like school. I was one of my parents always like laugh about it because I was the kid that if you wanted to punish them, tell them they're not going to school. Uh,
Mm.
so I've always loved learning, always loved literature. I'm still very, very big on literature. Um, but when it came to like kind of deciding what I wanted to do career wise, I actually first decided that I wanted to be an adoption agent because I loved babies.
Oh, wow.
Love kids. I love babies. And so I was like, oh, like that would be so nice to help babies find homes, babies who don't have homes. And I was in my careers and civics class and I told my teacher this. And you do the little quiz of like what things match up. And I was like, oh, I want to be an adoption agent. And she was like, that's great. However, the technology, the way it's going, is going to take over a lot of that job. So I don't know if that's very secure. And then she said, have you thought about social work? And that's kind of where I started to consider and think about social work. And I took that path. Funny enough, I said I would never be a therapist.
Mm.
That there is no way that I'm going to be a therapist. And the reason why I said that is because I didn't see nobody who looked like me in therapy,
Mm-hmm.
therapists or as people who were receiving therapy. And of course, we know
Mm-hmm.
the two, right? So, and I've always been like, I want to work with my people. And so if my people are not therapy, what am I doing there? That was my
Mm-hmm.
but then I realized that the reason why we were not there, like probably around like when I was in my master's, I realized the reason why we're not there is because nobody looks like us, and we're not represented not only just in body, but also not in the techniques that are used, not in the way that wellness and mental health is perceived. Like the methods that we use, culturally, are not a part of what's being taught in social work school to this day. So that was now because I'm a little rebel. I was like, well, now I have to be in therapy. I need to be what's not here. So that's kind of how yeah, I got into therapy.
Wow. Okay. There's so much you said there that I want to unpack.
Mhm.
Because I love to understand. So one, having two Grenadian parents. Are you first generation Canadian?
I am. I don't claim
Okay.
Canada, but I am first gen Canadian.
Okay. Because so the reason I asked that is one, typically when I speak to someone who is first generation Canadian or American, there comes a lot of pressures from our family and our cultures.
Yep.
So based on everything you said, I want to start with unpacking that piece. Where was there any pressures for you in terms of who you
Um,
became, what you did, what your expectations were of you?
yeah. There was a lot of pressures. Not pressure in the sense of like you have to be a certain thing, but pressure in the sense that you have to be something. And we
Mm-hmm.
are all looking to you, and we are all like to this day, like my family will say things like, we're so proud of you, you're making the family proud, and it's beautiful, but it's also daunting because it's like, damn, what if I mess up? What
Mm-hmm.
like, right? So yeah, being like my dad would say things like my parents, my parents didn't go to school. Well, my mom went to school here, like she went to Humber College. My dad didn't go to school here, so it was like I was the first to do a bachelor's, I was the first to do a master's. I was the first in many things, and I feel like that in and of itself came with a lot of pressure. So it wasn't a situation where it's like you have to be a doctor, you have to. My parents weren't controlling in that way of like having to pick my career, but it was very much like, and it's interesting because the way that the pressure came was from praises, right? Like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
so Breanna is so, oh, we know Brianna's going to. And that was where the pressure came from. So it wasn't
Mm-hmm.
like my parents were saying, you have to, you have to, you have to. But because they had a certain expectation of me, that expectation was the pressure. Well,
Mm.
well, if I step outside of this, what's going to happen? What does that mean
Mm-hmm.
I am and who people see me as? Which is something that I had to work through because while social work is definitely my calling, I know that while therapy is my calling, I don't think my why was always in the right place.
Mm.
And you can do the right thing for the wrong reasons. And I think at some points I was definitely doing the right thing for the reason of not disappointing, wanting to ensure that I aligned with the praises that I was getting. And I've had to like ask myself, like, what is your why? Because when you're doing things for the wrong why, it starts to feel uncomfortable and it starts
Mm.
to feel like, why am I? It feels like, what's to what end?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Wow. Okay, so I had previous questions based on what you said before. And now I'm like, because okay, so I know the pressures that can come with being the first only different, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if you are familiar with like Dr. Brene Brown stuff, but
Yes.
I read all her books. I'm obsessed with a lot of her teachings, and I've had a lot of those experiences being the first, only, or different. Most
Mm-hmm.
times I am the only Black person or the only Black woman
Mm-hmm.
in many of the spaces that I am in. You know, like you, when it comes to family, being pressured to do certain things because you're the first. And there's that pressure on you in terms of the expectation to shine.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like that in itself can cause long term effects.
Absolutely.
And I've seen in my clients where like one of the first things I ask them is like, especially with their careers, are you
Mm-hmm.
doing what you truly want to do? Because a lot of people are unhappy in their careers because they got into their career because that's what their family expected of them or society expected of them or
Mm-hmm.
someone else, but it's not truly what they wanted to do. So
Mm-hmm.
they're unhappy. They're not fulfilling their purpose. They're not their why. Like you said, sometimes you're doing the right thing for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I guess in terms of even with you getting into being a therapist and social work, because it was suggested to you
Mm-hmm.
and, like you said, you could be doing the right thing for the wrong reasons.
Mm-hmm.
What was your inspiration? Like, how did your soul get connected to being a therapist?
Yeah. So I think I would say that the connection started with my connection to community. So I would say that me becoming a therapist is a fall off of wanting to see my community well. But
Mm-hmm.
the connection started, I think, with my desire to be in community, to support community. And I would say that probably started from very young, like when I was really like probably 4 years old, because my family is very close knit. My dad, like when like I have three sisters, so there's four girls, and my dad would always say like you have to be your sister's keeper, like you guys have to be close. Like me and the sister that's immediately under me, we hated each other. Well, let me stop. Use my words. We could not stand each other. We could
Mm-hmm.
stand each other, sit each other down. Like we just were not we. And my dad would literally be like, "You guys have to like you have to love each other." He would literally put us together and force us to hug when we had arguments because he was like, "This can't happen because community and family is so important." And he grew up with his great grandmother, and back home they grew up in like kind of like a compound where it's like sister lives here, sister lives there, and he would always say, they would argue, but as soon as they finish arguing, somebody asking somebody for an egg and somebody's giving somebody flowers. So this long stretch of not being okay with each other, he was so troubled by it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And so I think from that, from like the way in which I was raised and my family taught me how important community was, and not only how important community it was, but how much of a healing source community is. And
Mm-hmm.
I then, took that into a broader spectrum to think about like Caribbean community and then like broader diaspora community. And so that's really where it started. So when I was in my when I was in my undergrad, I started this like, I don't even want to call it a non-for. It's just a local movement. I don't even know. It wasn't even a non-for-profit. It wasn't registered or anything, but it was called Soul Tree Community. And I would like have discussions and talk about issues in the community and like through community events. So that was the beginning. I think that would be the spark to what has led me to therapy. And therapy is just an extension of that, where it's like
Mm-hmm.
I now have seen new things. I've gone to school and I can contextualize certain things, and I realized that our community is not well, and so can I contribute to our community being well? And therapy is just
Mm-hmm.
ways.
Wow. Like everything I heard you say there, it's like community, connection, representation,
Mm-hmm.
like those things are all, I feel like, so vital to our healing as a person, as a community. Um, and I know growing up, especially, around a lot of Jamaicans, like when it comes to, mental health or things like that, like I don't remember as a child seeing or hearing anything positive when anyone had any issues with
No.
their mental health. There was no support. Those people were written off. They were considered mad, crazy. Like, they would get abandoned. Like, there were so many negative things that came with that. And
Mm-hmm.
then as we start to get older and we start, struggling with these feelings, and it's like, okay, well, I can't tell my family because this, you know what I mean? And
Mm-hmm.
then you talked about like getting into therapy and not seeing the representation and you wanting to be that representation, which I absolutely love.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess knowing what we know,
Mm-hmm.
have you found any common themes in your
Mm-hmm.
Black clients?
Oh yeah, quite a few. And it's interesting because of course we know Blackness is not a monolith, but there are so many connections in the things that we experience. I think one of the ones that's coming up a lot now is that so many of my clients realize that like they had some sort of learning difference that was not acknowledged or attuned to when they were a child. And, they would have thought, oh, well, I thought I was just lazy, or I thought I just wasn't able to learn, or I thought I was just, but they're like, if I had gotten certain testing, if my parents would have allowed me to get tested, and, or if the systems would have seen testing as something that was necessary for me rather than just saying I had behavioral issues, uh,
Mm-hmm.
then life would have been so different for me. And I think that right now is a big thing where it's like, people now, because things have changed, and I mean, as you know, with mental health, the language we have, the knowledge that we have, and so people are now in their adult years being like, oh my gosh, like I'm not lazy, I just had ADHD, or
Mm-hmm.
I'm not lazy, I was just depressed.
Mm-hmm.
You if you sleep too long, your parents, it's as a girl, are you pregnant? Like what is
Mm-hmm.
going on?
Mm-hmm.
Daydream fish, like. So I think one of the biggest things is that people are it's interesting because it's like there's two things. It's the relief that, oh my gosh, I understand what's going on, and then the grief of, oh my gosh, I didn't have this.
Mm-hmm.
How much easier or, more manageable would my life have been? And how much less trauma would I have incurred if I had what I needed? So it's this
Mm-hmm.
interesting balance between relief and validation, but then also the grief of the fact that it's only coming now.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Yeah. 'Cause now that's making me think back to like my childhood, my kids' childhood. Like, I think because of the lack of understanding,
Mm-hmm.
there was a lack of awareness,
Mm-hmm.
which led to like a lack of support.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mm.
And then there's also the piece around like I also wonder like for some people their parents knew that something was wrong. but there was so much shame around the fact that, and I say something was wrong, that's not the best wording. Something was different,
Yes.
right? Or there was a need there that was not being met. And there's so much shame around like, oh, my child is different, or my child, and then there's the whole like, oh, I rebuke it, or
Mm.
oh, you know, to face the reality that like there is a need here, and that's all it is, right? But there's also so much shame around being the I don't know, the parent or the person who has someone in their family who has that need, or who is different, or who is, wrong terminology, but mad, like,
Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes it's not even that they didn't know, but it's that they didn't want to face it because there was shame that came
Yeah.
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I I think about, I guess, different times. So I'm first generation Canadian,
Mhm.
and maybe because it's my obsession with wanting to learn,
Mhm.
and personal development, and how the brain works. I probably should have went into neuroscience. Um, but I can see how my experiences as a child and what I saw, how much I wanted that to be different from my kids.
Mm.
And between me and my partner and our children,
Mhm.
everyone in this house is under the spectrum, like from ADHD, autism, you name it.
Mhm.
Everyone is unique.
Mhm.
Everyone, as my partner says, everyone has their quirks. So we have to learn everyone's needs differently and how
Mhm.
to interact with everyone differently.
Mhm.
But not having that as a child, where I don't know if it's just the West Indian parents, they were in survival mode.
Yeah.
Their tolerance for certain things, their capacity for certain things,
Mhm.
um, you know was different.
Yeah.
um but I can see how that affected us now as adults, and my hope is that, with my children, obviously I'm not perfect. I'm still learning and evolving, but the support that they are getting helps the next generation,
Yeah.
which to me makes me see how important the work that you're doing
Mhm.
is, like, generationally.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's important, and it's also so difficult
Mm.
because I find it very important to incorporate family and community into sessions, but how do we do that when your parents are like, what's this mental health stuff? And you're like, no, like something's really wrong. So sometimes, I mean, mind you, like people are gaining the knowledge and the understanding, and it's gotten a lot better, but sometimes it just rubs against, right? It's like, how do I have a conversation with my mom about this new knowledge that I'm gaining about myself and what's happening for me, when her response to mental health is, you're just lazy, or, it's not a thing, or, something that a lot of, especially like, the younger generations are saying is like, my parents are just like, oh, you guys just always want to find something wrong with you. You don't have enough problems.
Mhm.
Right. So
Mhm.
it's such an important generational healing, but it's also so frustrating when you meet with older generations that just don't want.
Yeah. They're ingrained in their way of thinking. Like, I found, I guess, the deeper I went into my healing journey, especially at the beginning of the pandemic,
Mhm.
because of my awareness of certain things, and I realized that I had childhood wounds and childhood traumas that I had shut down and blocked out or thought were normal. And as I started to work through those things, I have to say I'm still presently working through some of my resentment with one of my parents,
Mhm.
um, because they don't want to hear, and they don't want this new information, and
Yeah.
any conversation that is brought to them in terms of accountability and moving forward, there's the shutdown, there's the projecting and whatever.
Mhm.
So I'm learning to work through that.
Mhm.
um, but my hope is, especially within the Black community, that more of us will embrace this healing journey.
Mhm.
And I guess my question for you is, like, how have you found a way to, I guess, approach the stigma
Yeah.
of therapy and mental health within the Black community?
Yeah. I think one of the ways that I've been intentional about it is by showing up just as I am, not putting on the, like, if you go on my, even like the photos on my website, like I'm not wearing a suit jacket. I'm just wearing loungewear.
Mhm.
And that's very intentional because I think that or I know that a part of the reason why we are so resistant to some of these things is because of our view of what it looks like, right? And the truth is that systems have done us dirty as Black
Mm-hmm.
individuals. They have done,
Mm-hmm.
they have abused us, they have name it. And
Mm-hmm.
so when we see something that looks like it represents a system that has done us dirty, now
Mm-hmm.
we're going to be defensive,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I feel like one of the ways in which I try to break that stigma is by showing people that like it doesn't have to look like what it's always looked like.
Right.
Right. Another thing is just being very transparent. I know that one of the reasons why parents, and I've also worked in education as well, and one of the biggest struggles that parents have is that they feel as though like schools are not transparent with what's happening. It's like you're taking my child and doing whatever, and I don't even know what's happening. Especially, we're in Canada where when your kid is 18, they're all of a sudden they're not your child anymore. They're an adult, right? And
Mm-hmm.
culturally, that's not the way that works. Like you're
Mm-hmm.
18 don't mean that, you know what I mean? So having conversations with parents. Of course, I have to like ask for the child for consent naturally because but if the child is okay with it, can I do check-ins with your parents? I won't obviously tell them what's happening in session like word for word, but I'll speak to my client and be like, okay, can I tell your mom that we're working on this? Can I tell them? And so just even having that conversation, I can see parents loosening up to be like, okay, she's not hiding anything. She's not doing anything with my child that I don't know about, right? But
Mm-hmm.
the initiative, not waiting until the parent comes to me and says, hey, I want to know what's happening, but taking the initiative to be like, hey, would you like to have a conversation
Right.
with me? Being very transparent with forms, like, okay, this is what I'm going to be asking. You can look at the form before I send it to your child. Yeah, I feel like that transparency is very helpful. And then also just like not speaking in clinical terms to people who are not clinicians.
Yeah.
Right? Because a lot of times that disconnect also comes from like, you're speaking a language that is not my language. And it's not because they're not smart or whatever. It's just, don't speak to me about, I don't know, aerodynamics because I'm not going to know what you're talking about. Right?
Right.
It's, I'm stupid. It's just because I don't have that language. Right?
Yeah.
So speaking to my clients and their family members like just like normal people, not like we're in a social work room or like we're clinicians. I think that's been helpful too because I a lot of times I'll say things and they'll be like, "Oh, I never knew that that's what that meant," or "I never understood it that way." Uh,
Mm-hmm.
so yeah, those are some things that I do to try to make it a little more accessible.
Yeah. Yeah. A couple of things you said there, which I guess resonated with me and why when I was starting my therapy journey, I was looking for a Black woman as a
Mhm.
therapist. And majority of the ones that I found were people I already know in my community. So I was like, I don't know if I want you to know all my business.
Yeah,
Um, so, I mean, my therapist is still a woman of color,
yeah.
but I know that in terms of our experiences, our language, our things that are normal
Mhm,
to us,
mhm,
I wanted to feel a level of comfort for me to
mhm,
be able to be vulnerable and transparent in my sessions. And I know outside of therapy, I've had a lot of conversations, whether it be the podcast or women within my community, where
mhm,
there's a lot of things that we experience in our community that are quote unquote normalized, but
mhm.
they're actually traumatic.
Yeah.
Like I can have a conversation with 9 out of the 10 women that I know,
Mhm.
and it's almost like, yeah, we've all been sexually abused, or
Yeah.
yeah, we were all physically abused, or we've been in toxic relationship, like all of those things, which hurts my soul when I hear that. But from a therapist perspective, like what are
Mhm.
some things that are traumatic that we normalize in the Black community?
Oh my gosh, so many things. Emotional abuse, sexual abuse. Um, I can't even think of things we don't normalize that are traumatic. Like, I feel like we normalize all sorts of abuse, to be honest. The mental, physical, emotional, like all of it. Spiritual abuse. We don't talk about that enough. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's I find that I always get to this point where I have to speak about history, but I think that it would be remiss of us to speak about that normalization without speaking about history. Um, because historically, and I'm speaking particularly, when we think about like colonization and slavery, particularly when we think about like Caribbean culture and other cultures who have been misplaced, we were called insane for wanting to be free.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
So they worked real hard to make unwellness our norm,
Mm-hmm.
right? And so I think we have come to a place where it's like, we're just happy to be alive. We just
Mm-hmm.
happy to be here. And when you're just happy to be here, it feels too much to say when something is wrong,
Mm. Yeah.
right? And we perpetuate that in our cultures when, when we hear parents saying like, oh, you should just be happy you have a roof over your head and food on the table. Well, no, that's actually not enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. Because if I'm eating that food and I can't stomach it enough because of all what's happening in my environment, then why doesn't matter that I have food on my table, right?
Mm-hmm.
Domestic violence. I don't know one person that is close to me that is Black that has not have some sort of interaction with domestic violence. Not
Right.
one.
Mm.
Sexual trauma. I'm a survivor of sexual trauma as well. Um, and it's wild. It's wild because I remember not wanting to share because I didn't want to burden other people.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And I mean, I think that's a experience of many sexual abuse survivors across the board, whether Black or not. But there's this, as much as community is important, I feel like sometimes we're so tied to what is well for the community that we don't think about what's good for us, not realizing that we are a part of that community.
Yeah.
If I'm unwell, then that means a part of the community is unwell too.
Yes.
So I remember being like, well, if I tell, then like this, I remember like there was a point in time when, because I was sexually abused multiple times. And there was one time when I really wanted to tell my mom, and she was just about to be her birthday. She had just started a new course. And I was like, I can't tell her because if I tell her, it's going to knock her off.
Mm.
And I think that goes back to the beginning of our conversation of like expectations and, I think when one of the other things is that when you are the first, everybody often thinks you know what you're doing and you're okay.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I feel like sometimes expressing your needs makes it almost feels like if I have needs, that means that I don't know what I'm doing.
Wow. Wow.
I feel like I strayed a little bit, but
No. Like, okay, first of all, I am sorry you experienced sexual abuse. I like sometimes doing this podcast is like so emotional for me. Like I'm an empath, but like many episodes I cry, many I laugh. But it's like the commonality that we all share.
mm-hmm.
Um, but then it's also sad where it's like such a high number of us
Yeah.
that have experienced abuse. And it's also frustrating, like you said, where so many have experienced abuse, many have not spoken up about it because we've been conditioned to put everyone else's feelings first. We've
Mm-hmm.
been conditioned to put ourselves last. We've been conditioned to think about how it's going to affect everyone else
Mm-hmm.
while we're suppressing it and it's killing us slowly.
And it's funny because it's funny. I'm just thinking. I actually wrote a whole poem about that, but I I talk a lot about we speak about how important storytelling is for our cultures, and I'm like, isn't it so wild that storytelling is such an important part of our cultures, but we lock up so many of our stories.
That part.
And my I probably could name more women in my lineage that were sexually abused than those that were not.
Mm-hmm.
One of my grandmothers told me about her sexual abuse story just last year.
Oh, wow.
And she said, I've only told one other person.
Wow.
And I'm just like, we keep experiencing these things and we think we are the only ones experiencing these things because nobody's telling us.
Yep. No one's talking about it.
No one is telling us. And in fact, in many cases, I mean, not my case, but in many other cases, when you do share, it's like, oh yeah, that's what happens. And that's where the
Mm-hmm.
normalization is. Oh yeah, That's what these men and them just do. Or
Mm-hmm.
that's what happens. Or yeah, that's how they are.
Mm-hmm.
What we think about, and this is something that has always bothered me, when a man is coming to the house and you say, "Oh, you can't wear that." Why are they coming to my house?
Thank you. This is my home.
Why are you bringing a man to my house that I can't wear tights around?
Mm-hmm.
What message does that send to me?
Right.
Right. And so there's so many ways in which we normalize these things that I know it's not intentional, obviously, but our culture our cultures have found ways to, instead of calling out the issue, making the person who is dealing with the issue.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, well, if you just do this, then they won't. If you just, I could be wearing a paper bag.
Mm.
Like, when we really think about it, babies are sexually abused. So what were they doing that was so wrong?
Exactly.
Right. And so I think we often don't realize the little ways. And even like myself, I've had to check myself sometimes, like because naturally we carry those thought patterns to think that we'll exist in that culture and no, I'm above it. No, we carry those. As much as I am a social worker and I advocate, I have to check myself sometimes to be like, oh, why did you think that first?
Mm-hmm.
Why was that your first thought? Right. And
Mm-hmm.
it's been seeped in this culture that says the victim is the problem,
Yeah.
not the person who's aggressing.
The victim shaming. The victim shaming is big.
Oh, in so many.
I I know people that have spoken out about their experiences
Hmm.
and gotten blacklisted. They
Hmm.
had to deal with the backlash of being cut off by family, friends. I personally have spoken out about my experiences with toxic ex and like exes and experienced like narcissistic abuse. And when I started speaking about it as I was going through my healing journey, like lost friends, had family members like say to me, well, why this or why that? It's like questioning, well, if it was so bad, this, or why did you stay for like the victim shaming is ridiculous. But on the flip side, speaking about it, because I always have to ask myself, if I'm going to speak up about something, who is this helping and who is this hurting?
Yeah.
And oftentimes we are holding on to our stories and not speaking up about the abuse, and we're
Hmm.
hurting ourselves
Yeah.
and we're protecting
Hmm.
the abuser.
Yep.
So when I openly speak up about stuff and people are getting mad at me, like I said, I ask myself first, who is this helping? Who is this hurting? But
Hmm.
I have found that it has helped a whole community of
Yeah.
women who feel like they don't have a voice because
Hmm.
they end up now in my DMs sharing
Hmm.
their story and
Hmm.
asking for resources and support so
Yeah.
that they can get the help that they need.
Hmm.
I've had people in my DMs that will explain that, they had no idea
Yeah.
about psychological abuse, emotional abuse, financial abuse, spiritual abuse. They only know physical abuse. You
Yeah.
know, it's
Yeah.
like, well, if he's not beating you, then, it can't be that bad.
Mm. Mm.
You know what I
Yeah.
mean?
Yeah.
So bringing that awareness to our
Yeah.
community so that we can get the help.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that's coming up in my mind as you're speaking is like, I feel like we need to, and it's like I don't even know where to start because it's like our parents need healing for themselves, right?
Mm.
A lot of times the reaction that they give is has to do with their own stuff, but I'm just like I feel like we need something to guide. How do you support someone when they tell you this has happened to me?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what are the things that you just don't say? What were you wearing? What, like, we need some sort of some. We got to start somewhere because
Yeah.
what is more painful than the actual incident is telling the incident and then feeling like you're not supported.
Yeah.
And that's often what happens, where it's like you share, and of course, like other people can support you, but it's different when your family says, I am so sorry this happened to you. This was wrong. This was, especially because the truth is that most of the times these things are happening with people who are in our families.
Yes. 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 And yes.
Right?
I have a family member who spoke out about a situation,
Mhm,
and I was younger at the time, and I just remember two women who were older than me who should have been her protectors.
mhm,
Um, when they first told me I was angry. And
Mhm.
then they came back and said, well, it was a misunderstanding. It wasn't sexual abuse. It was physical abuse. And it was like almost like they were trying to
Mhm.
justify or
Mhm.
change the narrative. So
Mhm.
as this family member got older, she suffered depression and other mental health
Mhm.
challenges. And then she decided to share her story publicly on a YouTube video.
Mm.
And this is, I'm going to try not to get too emotional. So she shared it on a YouTube video.
Mhm.
And my father, who lives in Jamaica,
Mhm.
came to Canada, came to my house and played the video for me and asked me if I knew.
Mm.
And I watched the video with my father and my eldest child, who is now 26. And
Mhm.
we cried. We
Mm.
cried and we immediately called her and we went to her, not only to apologize for us not knowing and not protecting her, but for
Mhm.
the fact that she felt like no one in the family protected her.
Mhm.
And I can't say for sure that, you know, her doing well now is because of that, but I completely saw a shift
Yeah.
in her view on life,
Mhm.
in her personality, in her energy.
Mhm.
Now that we are all completely supportive of her, we
Yeah.
believe her, we protect her, we are there for her. And it's like, I know women that don't have that. I know a woman my age that was sexually abused many times
Mhm.
by a family member and has yet to tell anyone in her family.
Oof. Yeah.
Like, there is so much happening within our community that needs healing that
Mhm.
sometimes I'm like, okay, obviously I'm only one person, you're only one person, there's only so much we can do. And
Mhm.
sometimes it feels like we may not be doing enough, but I feel like these conversations, I feel like the sessions that you do with people,
Mhm.
just in the awareness and people not feeling alone, people knowing that they can get support, that they can get help, being able to not stay in the darkness by themselves
Yeah.
is something.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's the thing, a lot of people like there's not a lot. Some people, when they think about therapy, they're like, "Oh, you're paying for someone just to talk to someone," and it's like, yes, yes.
Mm.
Uh, People don't realize how much, and this is where the idea of story sharing and storytelling is a healing tool because people don't realize that when you don't orate things, they stay in your body.
Mhm.
People will be like, "Oh, neck pain, shoulder pain." I know one woman that I was working with who would say, "I always feel like I'm choking.
Mm.
I always feel like I'm choking." I said, "Well, because you are
Internally.
internally."
Mhm.
'Cause even with me, she struggled to like. I had her like write out a letter to a family member who had hurt her severely, and she wrote it out, and she said, "I can't read it,"
Mhm.
and it took us a long time, but she read it, and she just bawled
Mhm.
because there's something to be said about saying what is going on out loud.
Yes.
And I don't know that people realize how releasing that is.
Mhm.
Journaling, so I'll journal, and then I'll look back and I'll read it, and I'll start crying. Like while I'm journaling, I'm not necessarily crying, but when you read what you said, it's like,
You're reliving it, processing. Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I go to therapy every week. I have a therapy session tonight. I feel like once I became aware that I had all these things to unpack, I was like, "Oh, no, no, we need to unpack all of this now."
mhm,
Like, I don't
mhm,
want to hold on to this anymore. I was diagnosed in 2006 with fibromyalgia, which is like chronic muscle pain. And they
mhm,
say like the side effects are depression, anxiety, blah, blah, blah. But as I have been doing the work, as I've been reading all the books, understanding that they actually have it backwards. It's the
yeah,
depression and the anxiety that's causing the body, the aches and the pains.
mhm,
It's the suppressing the emotions. The
mhm,
book The Body Keeps Score,
mhm,
lets us understand how these trapped emotions affect us physically. And
mhm,
ever since I've learned that, it's very important to me to
mhm.
express my
Yeah,
feelings. And
yep.
I know for a lot of people, it's challenging to hear or to
Mhm,
have these uncomfortable conversations, but I need
mhm,
to get it out. Like,
mhm,
these podcasts are a form of therapy for me. Going and talking to my therapist and releasing, those emotions, it works because
Yep.
I'm no longer suppressing it and holding it within my body and
Mm-hmm.
messing up, the chemical reactions that are happening in here,
Yep.
and the stress that causes all of these diseases, which is the word dis-ease
Mm-hmm.
together.
Mm-hmm.
We need to understand as a community that all of this sweeping everything under the rug and holding it in and holding it back is only killing us slowly. If you look at all of the health issues that we have as a community that we could potentially eliminate by
Mm-hmm.
releasing all of this trauma.
I love that because I hate when people say, oh, they're just predisposed. Why?
Mm.
Why are we predisposed? Why, if we know that race is a social construct and that there is no scientific thing that connects people to any race, then why is it that certain races are predisposed to certain things? Why are we predisposed to hypertension? Why are we? Something must have been happening to cause us to be predisposed.
Right.
Okay? And when we think about the trauma that we've experienced in our bodies, when we think about, I love to say this, when we think about, you know, specifically for, Caribbean people, we think about the foods that we eat. That's slave food.
Mm-hmm.
There's a reason why our foods have so much starch and so much, because they gave us the left. You think there was
Leftovers.
any oxtail? When we really think about what we're eating,
The body
oxtail,
parts. Mm-hmm.
foot, cow foot,
Mm-hmm.
chicken foot. And I always laugh. I'm like, now we make it real nice. We spice it up and we feed it back to them. But you think about the fact that, we are, predisposed to things like diabetes. Like, these things don't just happen because we're Black. We know that we know that race is a social construct. And so if we know that and we're saying, oh, Black people are predisposed to, why?
Mm-hmm.
What has socially caused this social construct grouping of people to be predisposed to these things?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Wow. Okay, so what words of advice would you give to a Black woman right now that is considering therapy?
Mm,
Or even that is thinking therapy is a bad thing? Like,
yeah. I would say that I understand why Black people think that therapy is not for Black people, because the way that therapy has been shown has not included us.
mm-hmm.
But baby, things are shifting.
Mm-hmm.
So I think I would say you belong here. You deserve to heal.
Mm-hmm.
It is your birthright.
Mm. Yes. Love it. Love it. Love it. Love it. Wow. Okay. What are some books that you would recommend
Ooh,
to
I
your
love this.
clients?
Yeah, books I would recommend. I'm looking this way because I have a bookshelf. You spoke about The Body Keeps the Score. Another
Mhm.
really good one is My Grandmother's Hands. It speaks about the way in which racial trauma lives in our bodies.
Mm.
Uh, that one is really good. If anybody's wanting to understand the Canadian context of anti-Black racism, I always suggest the Book of Negroes. That one is amazing. And to be honest, this is going to probably be like, Sisterhood Heals, by Dr. Joy Harden Bradford. There's another one. Oh, Unbound by Tarana Burke. She's the one who started the Me
I
Too.
just read that one. Mm.
So good. Love
Mm-hmm.
it. There's a book by Tarana Burke and Brene Brown. You Are Your Best Thing.
Yep.
That one's really good. All About Love by Bell Hooks. And to be honest, that's all like I love the nonfiction stuff, but I read fiction books because I feel like that's also a form of therapy for me.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and I'm a very much I love Black literature, Black fiction literature specifically. There's something about getting lost in someone else's story that is healing.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I have so
I
many
love
more.
it.
I can't keep going.
So first of all, I love the list. I think I've read some of them, and some, as you're saying, I was like, as soon as we're done, I'm gonna write them down because I'm going to add them to my Goodreads I need to read list. And then what you said about getting lost in other people's stories, I feel like that's how the podcast has been for me.
Mm,
The first 4 years, it was an extension of my story, just wanting to hear how other people overcame their adversities.
Mm-hmm.
And then the last year and a half, it was learning about other people's healing journeys, because obviously, everyone's healing journey is going to be different. Their
Mm-hmm.
pace is going to be different. The tools that work for them are going to be different. But I am learning so much and getting lost in other people's stories, but also finding pieces of me at the same time.
Yeah.
Mm.
And that's I think the power of getting lost in other people's stories that I say lost, but we find
Mhm.
pieces of us in other people's stories, and we
Mhm.
learn about ourselves in other people's stories. So it's when I say getting lost, it's maybe it's that we're finding ourselves in other people's stories.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the first time I had an aha moment for that, I was in Cape Town, South Africa, and that was like my first over the sea book signing that I did.
Mm-hmm.
And it was at it's like a community, what do you call it? Not like, what was it's a type of nonprofit. But anyway, they were allowing other people to share for about 5 minutes their
Mm-hmm.
story,
Wow.
and going around the room. And no matter what age, what race, what sex, no matter what, the person's story, there was something within it that we were able to take from, that we could resonate, within our own lives. So
Mm-hmm.
yes, definitely beautiful. I would love if you could tell the people where they could stay connected with you, or they can learn more from you and about you.
Yeah. So I'm on Instagram, mostly Instagram. I try TikTok. I'm not a TikTok girly, but I'm on Instagram at Breanna Chanelle, BreannaChanelle_. My therapy practice is BreannaChanelle.therapy. I have a website, BreannaChanelle. Yeah. I'm on LinkedIn, Breanna Chanelle Phillip. I don't know if people are hip to that, but but yeah.
Thank you so much, Brianna, honestly, for sharing your story, your wisdom, your gems, your energy, and your time. I do not take it lightly. I am, like I said, obsessed with personal development and healing. So I will continue to follow you on social. And I think everyone else needs to go and do so as well. I will definitely have all of your links in the detailed section below the episode, so they don't have to search too far. But thank you so much.
Thank you. This was healing for me as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you. To all you healers out there, until next time, subscribe on all platforms, and don't forget to rate the show and leave us a review on Apple Podcast. We just want to thank each and every one of you that continues to listen each week to help the show rank globally in the top 1.5% of most popular shows out there. And there's over 3 million podcasts. Feel free to share this episode with 3 people that you think would receive value from hearing today's gems. You can screenshot this week's episode. You can tag us on Instagram. You can tag Breanna Chanelle _. You can tag myself at The Real Makini Smith. A healthy community is a healing community, and a healing community is full of hope because it has seen its own people weather, survive, and thrive. So let's continue to heal her.